Welcome, friends and foes, teens and monsters. Nope, does not sound right at all. Let's talk about VHS, because my thoughts on this brand new asymmetrical game are, complicated to say the least. I'll be real, when I first heard about VHS, I wasn't exactly sold on what I was seeing. The 80s vibe looked fun, but when I saw the character designs for both teen and monster, I felt my fingernails retreating back into my hands with distaste. As such, I put off getting a beta key for the game for quite a while, only relenting to do so in early December, and my key arrived in the New Year wave. Lucky me. So I decided to check it out, see what the fuss was about, and evaluate what this miracle game the DBD community has mythologized has to offer. And I'm glad I did, because it really wasn't what I expected. I went into VHS prepared for the worst. Another last year, The Nightmare or Home Sweet Home Survive. Games that everyone lost their minds about until they completely imploded and collapsed as fast as they caught on. Suffice to say, I didn't believe that to be the case now. Despite only being in closed beta, the VHS community is already starting to emerge, and it seems like a relatively positive place to be. It might be because it's small, it might be because there's no post-game chat, it might be because it's mostly made of disgruntled DBD players unified under a common cause. But I've noticed a lot less toxicity in my VHS games than I have in any other multiplayer game I've played. And when it comes to toxic communities, I've been round the block. Dead by Daylight isn't great, but League of Legends, Overwatch, Counter-Strike, Team Fortress 2, and even tabletop games like Warhammer and Magic the Gathering. I've had way worse interactions with players more consistently in those games than I have with VHS. Although admittedly, if interactions like these are already starting to happen, oh baby, we are in for a wild ride once this game gets any bigger. But I have noticed something rather unsettling among the people who started to make their online home in the VHS community. And that's a very noxious attitude towards any meaningful criticism of the game. I'm not going to pretend to understand why it happens completely or what's causing it, but whenever I bring up an issue or grievance I've been having, it felt like I just turned up in Stamford, Connecticut to interview the chairman of the local men's club about his married life. The number of times I've spoken to or seen someone else speak to VHS players about the issues with various parts of the game, only to be immediately written off, it makes me not want to engage with the VHS player base if that's their approach to addressing points of legitimate concern. That's not to say those issues necessarily make VHS a bad game. On the contrary, I do think it's a good game made by a development team with an acute knowledge of how to maintain a balanced experience. To some degree, VHS just isn't really my kind of game, and I have my own reasons for that. But a lot of criticism I have goes quite a bit deeper than that, and represents serious issues that, while not a huge deal now, while the game is in closed beta, could easily snowball out of control if the people at Hellbent don't sort them out before early access or live release. I'm going to start by talking about the stuff pertaining to the teens, the survivor side of VHS where I have more positive things to say, and then move on to the monsters. First of all, I'm going to say the teens were without a shadow of a doubt given more care and attention from a story and design perspective than the monsters were, at least in terms of how creatively interesting they are. I'm a huge fan of all their personal animations that they have in the lobby. They give them so much personality and charm. Gloria, my favourite, is energetic and can't stay still. Faith is waiting there patiently. Brett's trying to goof off in his downtime. Leo's trying to show off to the younger members of the club. And Jess is just mooching around because she's got nothing better to do. Animation is one of the best ways to showcase a character visually. And VHS combines it with the distinctive clothing choices and colour palettes of each teen to make them unmistakably different from each other, which just makes it a tiny bit more jarring that most if not all of their animations in-game are shared. But that's not really a big deal, because it's presumably for gameplay clarity reasons, and they're customisable anyway, so if you don't like them you can just change them. That's another thing that I cannot praise enough about VHS, the customisation options. Partial or full outfits, stickers, taunts, even the Dollmaster's dolls can be altered with cosmetics, which is how Hellbent plans on monetising VHS since it's free to play. It makes great use of the vibrant colour palette made available by 80s setting and aesthetic, and if you're the kind of person who enjoys games as more of a dress-up simulator for your favourite characters, VHS will be ideal for that purpose. The lore bios, limited as they aren't done with the same level of vigorous care, however. The formula the teens seem to all follow is pretty clear. They're each based on a stereotype of 1980s cinema. either teen-centric horror movies like Nightmare on Elm Street, or coming-of-age comedy dramas like The Breakfast Club. We've got the jock, the cheer captain, the bad boy, the edgy girl who's not like the other girls, and the goody two-shoes who hasn't yet become jaded by the rigmarole of high school life. I mean, it doesn't even try to hide this at all. Watch The Breakfast Club, and you've basically been introduced to VHS's cast of teens. A couple of them have a dribble more depth than the stereotypes they employ. Mostly Brett and Gloria, the jock and cheer captain respectively. Both of them slightly subvert the stereotypes, since Gloria is implied to have a rough home life that belies her positive and successful outward appearance, and Brett has issues with the enormous expectations placed upon his shoulders. But it's worth remembering, in the movie where these 80s teen stereotypes came from, the sports captains and cheerleaders and the popular kids were either the antagonists or just massive assholes more often than not. The fact that the other three teens stay very loyal to their stereotypes suggests to me that Hellbent will only deviate at all from them when trying to make their characters more sympathetic. Basically the bare minimum. Which, you know, for an early endeavour that's fine. As long as their personalities are distinct, they'll be good building blocks for future stories. And don't get me wrong, those stories are coming. Both the teens and the monsters have lengthy additional lore you can unlock via completing challenges, kinda like DBD's Rift system. Fair warning, this system takes about 400 years to unlock any substantial amount of story content, but honestly it's not a major point of concern for me. What is a point of concern, however, is Hellbent's religious reliance on these 80s stereotypes and the potential harm that might do to future characters. Because how many more stereotypes are there to work with? The well isn't tremendously deep and it'll go dry quickly, especially since you are likely limited to teenagers. Sure, you've got the braces-clad nerdy kid and the friendly but melodramatic theatre kid still to go, but what then? Are we going to get any adult characters in the future? If so, is the teen side going to stop being called teens? I worry Hellbent has hemmed themselves into a creative corner they really didn't need to put themselves in. I could be wrong, they could have better plans, but while this isn't such a problem now, it risks becoming a very significant issue in the future if Hellbent doesn't realise how limited the shelf life is on character stereotypes like this. Which brings me on to talking about the gameplay of the teen side. I am pleased to say the biggest improvement by far that VHS makes over Dead by Daylight is the solo queue experience. It's so much more tolerable being a solo teen in VHS than it is being a solo survivor in Dead by Daylight. Between the ping system and the voice comms the team has access to, you can be a lot more coordinated with random players, and you'll end up in way fewer situations where the whole team just isn't doing anything. As long as you're playing with teammates who use these functions, you'll feel a lot less helpless without your friends beside you. This does also mean that if you get a team who doesn't use the comms features, especially if they don't ping, you're pretty much guaranteed to have a horrible experience. But there's something very important that you need to bear in mind about the gameplay of VHS. Stealth is one of its biggest elements, arguably its biggest. If the monster finds you and you don't have a weapon, your only choices are either to lose it in the tight winding corridors of the maps, or lead it into a teammate with a weapon who might be able to repel it. If your teammates don't ping, good luck finding someone to get it off you, or finding someone in danger when you do have weapons so you can bail them out. Because you have pretty much zero information on the monster's location at any given time, you're relying on the positions of your teammates a lot more to navigate the map and save yourself time otherwise spent wandering about aimlessly until you find someone else. So, if you're a solo queue teen in VHS, ping constantly. Even if you don't use a VC system, for the love of God, ping. It's such a useful and important tool to get used to using. Please, seriously, just do it. It makes the game much more tolerable for everyone. Another positive thing I can say about the gameplay of Teen is it's got a lot more complexity than Survivor gameplay in Dead by Daylight. Learning how to use all different weapons is quite the experience. There's more interactables like vending machines and heal stations, and there's even a means to revive a single dead teammate once a match by finding it and using the Book of the Dead. If you want an involved test of teamwork, you can sink your teeth into mastering, playing Teen will likely scratch that itch, potentially explaining why so many DBD creators and streamers are migrating over to it. If you spent potentially years on end, getting frustrated by solo queue survivor teammates trogging out, or having less and less fun playing killer as survivors get smarter, it makes total sense why you want to migrate over to a game where the baseline solo queue experience is way smoother, and most players haven't gotten good enough to figure out what they're doing yet. The biggest issue I found with playing Teen is, paradoxically, the downtime caused by not having a primary objective to complete. In Dead by Daylight, if you don't know what else to do, you can just hop on a generator at any point during the match, and know that despite not interacting with a killer, you're taking the game closer to its completion by doing the objective. You turn the downtime from chases into productive means. In VHS, once you've got your weapon, all you have to do is track the monster down and find a way to take a stigma, one of the 4 elemental weaknesses a monster can have that functions like a health state. But because maps are so large and windy with such bad sightlines, there's a lot of times where nothing is really happening, especially because monsters aren't incentivized to commit the chases once teens start to get armed. This becomes very notable because VHS games can go on for quite a long time. And don't get me wrong, I like a good long game, but only when the game is organically lengthy because of all the decisions made by both sides, and not lengthened artificially by events of conflict being padded out by large periods of inaction. And because players on both sides right now are inexperienced and often not confident enough to know when to get aggressive, that has a habit of dragging games out in the worst possible ways. On paper, the Rift system does help with this problem. After long periods of inaction, the game spawns a control point on the map that grants wall hacks on the side that captures it until someone gets a hit. And this creates a point for both sides to fight over and forces interaction. But this can also backfire, because if the side that captures it is at a disadvantage and thus punished for aggression, for example a solo teen who claims the objective or a monster who captures it but sees multiple teens crafting weapons in the process, they can just stall the game out by having perfect information on the other side to inform their hiding spots, of which there are many. The same systems that can force interaction between both sides can also lead to extended game stalls and huge periods of downtime, which can be a massive turn-off for a lot of players, especially with map design making chance encounters relatively unlikely. Since this is an issue that can affect both sides, this gives us an excellent segue into talking about the monster side of things. I'm going to break it down by individual monster, starting at the bottom and working my way up to talking about the monster that I hold in highest regard. So, Werewolf. Ugh. I almost don't want to talk about this guy because everything about him is so relentlessly uninspiring. I fully believe everything wrong with VHS, from its aesthetic to its gameplay, can be summarised by Werewolf. Let's start with the most obvious in the visual design department. It's a werewolf. Like, just a werewolf. Deadass the most generic, bland, copy-paste, unimaginative possible take on the werewolf formula you could ever imagine. You look at the design of VHS's werewolf and you wouldn't know it was from VHS. You could be looking at the werewolf from Harry Potter, or the one from Dog Soldiers, or Cabin in the Woods, or Teen Wolf, and you would not be able to point to any part of the design as something unique to VHS. It's like it's been stolen and the serial numbers filed off, because it has none of the personality that such a vibrant game clearly tries to capture. That's all there really is to it. A cookie-cutter, generic werewolf. An extra from Twilight, if you will. And that's so disappointing, because it could easily have been so much more. But I'll be talking about that in a moment. VHS's most generic monster also has its most generic ability kit. He has a howl that disables weapons in a shortish range around itself, a movement speed boost that will allow him to close the gap, and a tracking ability that gives you a sound cue that gets louder and louder the closer you are to a teen. And I guess it works? Because if you say, I want to make a power set for a werewolf, this is probably what you'd end up with, but that isn't so impressive when you realise that it hews so close to interesting werewolf tropes while bringing absolutely nothing unique to the table that it'd be kind of hard to mess up such a tried and tested formula. The flavourless ability kit, I've noticed, can lead to some pretty miserable scenarios on both sides, because how being able to deactivate multiple weapons at once is such an incredibly powerful tool that a huge amount of Werewolf's gameplay is just hiding or corner camping till it comes off cooldown, and only engaging with fight when you have the means to remove the teen's abilities to fight back completely. The gameplay loop of howl near a group, hit one of them, use Berserk to catch up to them, and then down them now they're isolated is a pretty nasty one and is probably the least interesting way a team can go down. Because of how game-changing Hal is, Werewolf's kit warps around it, to the point that I find him to be extremely binary. I'm not saying Werewolf is a skillless character, but he functions best as a character who makes the skill of the teams he's facing irrelevant by shutting down their ability to run or fight back. I played him a few times for this video and I felt nothing. You just kind of feel like a Hal bot most of the time, and that goes out in some really cheesy situations where the team just sort of dies because you had the right combination of abilities off cooldown. And even if this kit needed to stay the way it was, there's no excuse to have the visual design be so flavourless. Like, if it had to be a werewolf, why not go for a crazier design? We've had so many werewolves that are just bipedal wolfman. Why not have one where a part of the human body is still visible, hanging off the werewolf's torso or back like a parasite? Hell, League of Legends turned its generic wolfman into something unique by giving it technological augmentations and body parts from other animals to make it visually distinct. Maybe something like that could have worked here. There's nothing inherently limiting it to being a wolf either. Why not a humanoid rat or a cat or a bear or an ox or a fucking badger? I don't care. Just give us something to point at and go, that's a VHS monster. That's not too much to ask, is it? This early in a game's life cycle is when you should be consolidating your visual identity instead of boiling your character down to the most generic common denominator that it can be. And that is exactly what they did designing Werewolf. I'm sorry, but that's my take on it. His design hasn't just been scraped from the bottom of the barrel, but has actively tunnelled underneath the barrel into the floor of the wine cellar and is now vibing in the Earth's outer core. That's how much I dislike this guy. Fortunately, the only way to go from rock bottom is up. Wart is a very funny little lad, and I kind of like him. In a way. He's definitely a lot better than Werewolf, I say that without a shadow of a doubt. In his movie, Wart, or the weaponized amphibious replicant technology, was a biological experiment created by Replicorp. It escaped from its facility and ran rampant. And that's really all the bio tells us, but that's still way more world building than Werewolf gets, so I guess it'll do. Wart's kind of been adopted by the VHS community as the team dog, in much the same way the DVD community adopted the Demogorgon, and I get why. It's the combination of tiny eyes, big hands and a rounded shape that make him look like a toy that came out of a cereal box. Almost like King Shark in the Suicide Squad, if that makes sense. He's just a silly little guy, and we love him for that. However, one cannot feed a hungry lawman on being a silly little guy alone. And that's what brings me to my issue with Wart. His design not really fitting too well with the relevance of his gameplay. Much like Werewolf, Wart has 3 abilities. Acid Armor, which lets him protect himself with weapon fire for 12 seconds. Echolocation, which lets him track where all teams are but the feedback has a few seconds of delay. And Leap, which jumps him in a direction and slows everyone near the point of impact. For what it's worth, I really like Acid Armor as an ability. It feels like a less cheap version of Howl, results in fewer binary interactions, and it works well as the defensive tool of a biological mutant. Echolocation is kinda strange, but I don't hate it. It's reminded that the point of a bioweapon is that it should be able to track you intelligently and plays up the paranoia as you're not sure where you were when Wart got sent of you. That's where he'll be going, so the best thing you can do is move on. Kinda like Mr. X or Nemesis from Resident Evil games. The issue I have is Leap, because if you look at Wart's visuals, I don't really think it works at all. Wart's visual inspirations are not exactly subtle. He's basically a bulkier and more cartoonish version of the Dilophosaurus, a theropod dinosaur from the early Jurassic period. It gained international recognition in Jurassic Park as the Spitter with the colourful neck frills that Razor is about to attack, something that was never a trait of the real Dilophosaurus. Wart is basically what one of those would be if it took steroids and hit the gym for a few years straight. He's a bipedal lizard, but unlike the ones in real life, is extremely top heavy, with a super thick neck, long muscular arms and a hunched posture that puts his head in front of the centre of gravity. And if you're still wondering why I don't think a leap works for a character like that, try jumping forwards while hunching yourself over and carrying a heavy weight on your shoulders. You'll just fall on your face. With something like the Demogorgon, a jump attack works because the creature is extremely light, or lean muscle like a greyhound. But Wart's just a much, girthier lad. And to give something so chunky a decent amount of forward momentum, it had to be quadrupedal, running around on 4 legs instead of just 2. Which Werewolf does sometimes, but Wart doesn't. I know it sounds like a nitpick, and that's because it largely is. When your characters don't have much story to go on, you have to look at their visuals to get a sense of who they are, and Wart's visuals just don't mesh properly. I guarantee I can tell you how this came about. They realised, damn, wait a second, we need Wart to have a gap closing ability like Werewolf's Berserk. So just copy pasted the jump over from Dollmaster and didn't bother to change Wart's established design to reflect its athleticism. It's a shame because Wart's defining trait, being a biological weapon, gives him some potential for interesting and unique visual design. Imagine instead of those massive shoulders, he has a shell-like carapace on his back, and for the leap it opens up to reveal wings that propel him forwards. Or switch him more radically to a quadrupedal design, and turn him from an armoured lizard into an armoured frog that launches itself forward on powerful rear legs. Imagine what Wart would be able to do with a more amphibian or insectile design. I don't think anything would fit the cheesy 80s vibe better than going against a Wart, and every time it echolocates, you hear this that echoes across the map from an armoured frog the size of a family hatchback. Aside from the not huge but noticeable difference between his visuals and his gameplay, I think my biggest issue with Wart is how formulaic his kit design is. Him and Werewolf both suffer from this problem. They both feel like their kits were designed on a spreadsheet. First we give them the weapon no hurty move, then the being closer move, then the find the team move. To paraphrase Ian Fleming, once is a happenstance, twice is a coincidence, 3 times is lazy and formulaic power design with a limited design space. None of Wart or Werewolf's abilities directly synergize with each other, creating kits that feel incoherent and cobbled together to fit a design rubric instead of creating nuanced and interesting character. Wart and Werewolf feel like you play as them, not with them, and that makes the play pattern they're resulting feel pretty linear, to say the least. Each ability does one thing, and how well you do depends on whether you use the right abilities at the right time in the right order. And if that's your thing, go for it. I'm not here to yuck your yum, I'm just here to give my verdict. The issues with the kit designs of Werewolf and Wart have raised some concerns in my mind about the potential future of monster kit design. If future monsters are going to be this formulaic, linear and internally disconnected, the formula is gonna age like milk. But the key word here is potentially. Just because VHS might have formulaic kit designs if they continue to follow the Wart and Werewolf formula, doesn't mean they have to be. And that's because there's a power design in VHS that's one of my favourites in any multiplayer game I've ever played, one that should surprise nobody. Dollmaster. Just like how I said that every issue with VHS can be exhibited with Werewolf, I think everything positive about VHS is showcased perfectly with Dollmaster. Visually, he's fantastic. Easily as interesting as the monsters. While it's fairly obvious where Werewolf and to a lesser extent Wart came from, Dollmaster is much more of an original creation. While the creepy doll thing is far from an uncommon trope in horror, most of the time they are either possessed by something immaterial, like the soul of Chucky or the demon possessing the Annabelle doll in The Conjuring, or under the control of a human, like the puppet in Puppet Master or even Billy the Puppet in Saw. Dollmaster is a pretty elegant middle ground between the two. He's basically a giant doll who conjures and controls the smaller ones, reminding me more of Mary Shaw from the 2007 James Wan flick Dead Silence than anything else, and the brief snippets of lore that we get support this. To the Dollmaster, the dolls are his family, his children, and the hotel is a family home. Much like Mary Shaw, he's both the leader of the family of dolls and kind of a doll himself, and Hellbent took full advantage of that to make him possibly their most visually interesting character. Between his wooden hands, glassy eyes, and massive mouth held together by stitching at the corners, the Dollmaster is very clearly not human, at least not anymore. But he moves completely fluidly, wiggling his fingers with glee as he revels in the torment he inflicts. He might be a doll, but he is nobody's puppet. He has human mannerisms despite his inhuman form that let him slip perfectly into the uncanny valley between human and alien. He's got a lot of personality, and his messed up proportions meld with the game's cartoonish art style to create the kind of monster you could only get in a game like VHS. And his gameplay is just as unique and engaging as his visuals. Before I go any further, yes, I'm a twins main. A multi-part killer is always going to be my favourite. And I'd be lying if I said I hadn't picked it up relatively quickly, in large part because of my experiences with twins and to a lesser extent Hag. But let me go into why briefly. Because while Wart and Werewolf have, as I described before, kits held together by a certain formula that they abide to with abilities that don't directly play off each other, Dollmaster could not be more different. See, Dollmaster's entire kit is enabled by the dolls, which he can deploy in the environment as traps. They alert the Dollmaster if a team comes nearby, with an activation if the team runs right past them. And Dollmaster can interact with them in a couple of ways. He can control one for a limited time, allowing him to chase or even jump on an unsuspecting teen, and at any time he can switch back to his main body or even to another doll. Although if he'd prefer, he can teleport to the doll anywhere on the map, as a form of map coverage on a long cooldown. He's equipped with many unique strengths, such as the doll's ability to burn through a teen's ammunition very quickly, an extremely fast downing time if you play your cards right, and incredible map coverage once you get set up. But also comes with many unique weaknesses, such as an aversion to straight up combat due to no direct defences, and vulnerability to certain weapons like the eyeball, RC copter, and child weapons in general. The combination of these abilities gives Dollmaster a skill ceiling, learning curve, and a level of creativity unlike anything else in VHS so far, because how you use each ability will directly affect how you use each of the others, and you have to make plans on the fly accordingly. After hitting with a doll, do you switch back to Dollmaster and keep it around for later, but risk a teen doubling back and disabling it? If they do that, maybe it's an idea to preemptively teleport so when they come back they run right into you. Is there a second doll they're running into that you can switch to? Do you have time to do any of this before a teen finds and attacks your idle body? Dollmaster changes the way VHS is played so completely for both sides, it feels like he's part of a totally different, and in my opinion far better game. Wart and Werewolf feel like their kits were designed to chemical formulas to ensure balance at any cost. Kit cohesion, character, and even fairness all thrown to the wayside to make them work. But with Dollmaster it feels like they threw that away and wrote a song instead. Yeah, Dollmaster is VHS's strongest monster by a mile and has a good chance of getting nerfed, but that's the beauty of it. You can always nerf or buff an interesting and unique but unbalanced design into a more balanced state. Once design is bland, binary or repetitive, that's something that you can never really fix, no matter how well balanced it is. Dollmaster might need balance changes, hell, I think a nerf to his teleport is probably in order because that shit is way too spammable. But that's very easily fixable by Hellbent as they collect more data and observe new players. Although, despite how much I love Dollmaster, I'm afraid to admit I won't be one of those players. Because so far, I've avoided talking about VHS's biggest issue, and this is one that goes beyond a personal gripe or a matter of taste with the game. It's a pretty serious problem that's as pervasive as it is probably unfixable. The biggest issue with VHS by an absolutely colossal margin is accessibility for the hard of hearing. Like, I can't even begin to tell you just how hearing intensive this game is. If you've got hearing difficulties, a bad headset, or live in a moderately noisy environment, you're basically playing with one hand tied behind your back. For disclosure, my directional hearing is pretty much shot to hell. For a sense of what that's like and how judgmental that can be, try playing with your headset speakers set to mono instead of stereo, and tell me how it feels. It's why I can't play as or against Spirit in Dead by Daylight. If you can't discern direction via hearing, you're kinda boned. VHS is almost entirely governed by that principle. If you can't hear precisely where the things happening around you are going to have a horrible time, because at its core, VHS is a stealth game. Everything about it is designed to make passive tracking pretty much impossible, forcing you to rely on tracking abilities, team communications, or just good old fashioned fucking guessing to work out where the other players are and what they're doing. There's no scratch mark or red stain style system to provide a visual aid for tracking. Instead of blood, teens briefly ooze some silvery puddle called chromatic aberration that's much harder to see. The monster's camera is jerked upwards when they get a hit, meaning teens can scramble away and easily break line of sight again, and maps are designed full of narrow windy corridors and virtually no wide open spaces to provide sightlines. This can create some interesting situations where you hear a crafting station going off and work out which station is being worked on by discerning which station makes which noise. But far more often, it creates situations when you're hearing footsteps 2 meters away from you, but because you can only see about 2 centimeters in front of your face, you have no idea where it's coming from. They could be in the corridor above you, or below you, or in either of the rooms to your left or your right. It could even be running away from you, or running up behind you with a weapon, waiting to ray gun your ass as soon as you stop moving to turn back and check. You can't see them because there's a ceiling, or a floor, or a wall, or a sharp turn obscuring your vision. So unless you can hear them perfectly, you've just got to guess. And with weapons and corner cavity monsters being so common, you better guess right, Sonny Jim, or else you're probably losing a health state or a stigma, because you guessed wrong. Because the game does everything in its power to totally deny you information. And this wouldn't be so infuriating if ambient sounds in this game weren't so goddamn loud that they stifle the stuff you actually need to hear. The monsters do have a sort of terror radius-esque system, but it's a lot quieter than the sound of the crafting stations, so much of the sounds of the map will drown it out. Monsters' footsteps are so loud that you often have to stop moving to listen out for other sounds. And almost every room is full of random destructible items like chairs, desks or vases, making incredibly loud noises when you walk past them, muffling the sounds that you need to hear to play the game properly. It's infuriating, and not in a way that drives me to improve either, because you can't learn any of the game's strategy or mechanics if you don't have the information to decide what you should try to do. And if your hearing isn't up to scratch, you have no way to acquire that information. The prize of interacting with the other players is effectively locked behind good hearing much of the time, and the worst part is, that isn't something that I think people at Hellbent can or even should fix. Because you can't really provide aids to hearing difficulties in the same way that you can to, say, colour blindness. If certain visuals are hard to discern, modes like colourblind options can be implemented to help combat that, without the need to change audio, but hearing is significantly harder to compensate for, without using visual stimuli that would also benefit those with good hearing as much as those without. VHS is so tightly balanced around sound, it's woven into much of the game's core functionality, to the point that you can't really fix this problem. When everything from your map design to the sound of your character's footsteps are designed to make sound the only tracking tool you can depend on, and as a result, the key to engaging with other players in the game on your terms, that is going to be inherently inaccessible and exclusionary. It's one of the reasons a console release of VHS could be a bit of a monkey's paw situation, because a lot of console players use their TV audio instead of a headset, which sounds like a singularly unplayable experience. I wish I could be less harsh on this aspect, because at the end of the day, the sound system is kind of what makes the game function, and it's clearly a point of appeal for a lot of players. But I pretty much can't play more than 2 or 3 games of VHS without needing a little break, because spending 90% of my time straining into my headset trying to hear enough sound so I'm not stumbling blind through the game is draining and miserable. But it's the entire skeleton of the game, so realistically there isn't a huge amount you can do to solve it. It's why, more than anything else, I can confidently say that VHS is not the game for me. I don't think it ever can be. But that doesn't mean it can't be the game for you. Right now, VHS is at a crossroads. There's a lot to like about it. The teens are fun, and their gameplay allows for complex decision making and team play that most other ASIMs struggle with. And on the monster side, Dollmaster is the perfect display of the potential VHS has, with a super interesting character design, backed up by complex and high-skill gameplay that turns the more laborious elements of the game, like learning map layouts and hiding spots, into rewarding learning experiences that you can weaponize against the teens. But the other monsters vary from quaint but uninspired at best to cheap and derivative at worst, and the teens as characters mostly subscribe to a limited pool of stereotypes that risks drying up as more characters come out. That's VHS's biggest flight risk going forwards. Aside from accessibility concerns, creative stagnation over time is likely to be the biggest point of failure for the game, both in terms of character design and storytelling due to the limitations of the setting, and in terms of gameplay if the formula set out by Wart and Werewolf becomes a rubric of future monster kit designs. It's not like the crew at Hellbent can't make interesting characters. They can. They just don't do it very often. And I don't know what's coming during the rest of the beta, early access, or the game's live release in terms of more content. But that'll be the proof in the pudding. If we end up with more Dollmasters and Glorias than we do Werewolves and Faiths, I think VHS will be in a fine spot. It won't be the DVD killer, god no, but with accessibility issues, lack of marketable licenses, and unavailability of console players, DVDs are going to still be the king in the castle. But as an alternative ASIM that brings a lot of its own stuff to the table and an option for long-time DVD players looking to play a very different ASIM experience, VHS will be ideal. The tone of this video might not convince you wholly of this, but I really am rooting for you guys at Hellbent. If any of you are watching this, you've got an audience that clearly loves what you make as much as you do, and that's something to be deeply proud of. But that will breed a lot of expectations that they'll put on you and that you'll put on yourselves. However VHS continues to go, I wish you the very best of luck. And I hope what I have to say has been insightful or helpful in some way. That's what I'm here for. But to any of my viewers interested in giving VHS a go, try it out and see for yourself. It's not a game for everyone, but it doesn't have to be, and it could be for you. So it would be dishonest of you to dismiss it out of hand. And you might rob yourself of an experience that you might really enjoy. So once again, thank you all for listening. I'll be back to my normal lore videos next time. Thank you.